Well, you saw that they've ceased exports of wheat now.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
locking it up too. This whole resource nationalism or food nationalism is going to be, I think, the thing that drives famine way faster than the actual crop losses. Is the full
Hmm.
disruption of anything exportable. So then I like to do the chasing the chain here, because you can already get a full list of the countries that are going to start to implode first. So just the lowest hanging fruit. What are the African nations that rely on the Ukraine and Russia for the majority of their wheat, corn, and soy and
You have
animal
all the
feed input?
countries from Morocco all the way to Afghanistan that are very dry. They don't have a lot of good land for growing. Their populations have grown massively over the last 30, 40 years, and they can't feed themselves. And yes, the Russians sank 7, 8 huge grain ships of the Ukrainians, and they've cut off all that grain. Ukrainians feed those countries, and now it's not happening.
Sell in May and go away. Crash is king, as the sell off in the stock market has crushed Americans' IRAs and 401ks. Morgan Stanley says all stocks inside the index are likely to see a steep downward decline. Deutsche Bank and Citi are predicting a major recession. Barron's and Lawrence Lepard betting that gold hits 3,000 in the next 2 years. Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China are looking to diversify out of U.S. dollar-denominated assets. And now Russia demanding payment for natural gas in rubles. So could this spell the end of the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency? Call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 1-800-356-4470 for a free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated IRA gold dealer from 2016 to present, click on that link in the description box below. And now on with the video. And good afternoon, everyone. Today I have with me Jeffrey Nyquist. We've had a couple interviews before, and today we really wanted to talk about what's going on in China. Why are they cutting the wheat early? And then also some geopolitics on the food end of things coming out. We're getting some solid numbers around the world right now of what the first projected losses would be, and those will tick up. So Jeffrey, thanks for joining me. And as we were on the call earlier, we were talking about war preparations and what's happening with North Korea and China right now. Talk about China for a second, Chinese history.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you go back, say, 3,000 years, you cannot find a Chinese dynasty that's lasted longer than 400 years, because these grand solar minimums wipe out food production, food growing, areas shrink, plant and harvest dates shrink. And that's a fact that a lot of people didn't know. And just even knowing that one fact about Chinese history will totally reset the way you think. Because if these grand solar minimum cycles are on a 400-year period, and Chinese dynasty collapses around 380 or 350 to 400, there's something really that syncs up there. But if we're coming out to a heavy, more powerful cycle on a 2,000 years power, that's going to really start shifting a lot of things, including what we're seeing in the other planets, then what?
Are we talking about the event that maybe is alluded to in the book Hamlet's Mill?
I don't know if it would be that. It would be in part, but they're talking about the cataclysmic disasters, on orders of magnitude that wipe it back down to, 10 million humans on the planet.
Right.
That kind of disaster coming in versus electromagnetic field changes. So you got two choices here. You can come clean with the populace and say, hey, by the way, we knew this 30 years ago. We threw global warming in your face so you wouldn't look too deeply. And by the way, it's time to start growing your food. Sorry, my bad. But can you pay your taxes next year? We need a little more money to prepare for our continuity of government. Or you just wouldn't tell people, and it would cause too much panic.
I had a reader that had connections that contacted me about 5-6 weeks ago, said that the FEMA was massively stockpiling food for the government. Have you heard this?
Yeah, and that explains a lot of the disappearance of the rail cars and also the shipping containers. Because I've spoken about this maybe last year. There was a lot of shipping containers that disappeared off the face of the earth to the point where I think it was Hapgood Lloyd put an order in for 1.5 million brand new shipping containers. So where did the other ones go? Oh, they're just stuck up a Himalayan mountain high over in China or something was the excuse, but that wasn't, because then in China, they're like, we don't have enough shipping containers because they're all outbound. We're waiting for them to come back in. Ships in between transit points.
Right. So we were holding on to them.
Well, you're packing them full and then putting them underground, continuity of government. I mean, they're being used.
Right.
They didn't just disappear. They're still on the earth. They just are being used. And rail cars too, this whole thing about, you know, the BNS and F are saying, oh, we can't take on any more route. Oh, our freight cars are full. We can't do this. Or they're cutting routes. They're cutting deliveries. Where are the rail cars going? Same exact place. Because imagine how much you can put on a rail car versus what you can put in on, say, even a 53-foot container.
Do you think that this electromagnetic event is going to happen this summer?
No, my dates on it are October of 2024.
October of 2024. Have any astronomers publicly commented on this, to your knowledge?
A few, but they had to retract and
oh, really? Oh boy.
The intensity of it on the onset of the cycle begins now. Almost everybody that was looking at it from a energetic cycle onset was pinging right around these years here, around 2020-ish, plus or minus a couple years. So it seems like we're in it, and it seems that governments are responding to it. And one thing I don't understand with all this food that is not being grown at the moment, so let me give you a quick rundown on what's been publicly stated over the last week, or even 4 days. Rice production globally is going to decrease 10%. That's the initial starting number that they're giving you. But the lack of fertilizers is going to take that up to the next update you'll get is like, oh, it's going to be a lack of 15%. And eventually I think we'll get around 22% loss of global rice production this year. Now, you know how that's going to affect Asia. And they're coming out publicly already saying wheat is going to be down 20% based on just Ukraine and Russia alone. They didn't add any fertilizer losses because of the fertilizer shortages. They're not accounting for any of that. Herbicide shortages, chemical shortages, they're not accounting for any losses of yield in the field at all from those two factors, or actually three: pesticide, herbicide, and fertilizer. And diesel fuel prices going to record highs, and in availability, they're predicting a shortage here in the East Coast coming up in the next few days.
Could Russia's invasion of Ukraine be about taking the land because it's further south and it's better land for growing?
Oh, yeah. Like, look at the bread baskets that are under duress right now. You can't tell me Kazakhstan and Ukraine both go down in the same year, and those are the two biggest bread baskets in Eurasia. That's too coincidental. Again, with all these things happening, the contraction of the economy, the World Economic Forum saying they're going to reset right now. Why now?
Why
not 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when pollution was getting real bad? Everybody was opening Airbnbs. Flights were like 10 cents to go to the next country, millions of planes in the skies, and they decided, oh, this year we need to stop it. They just ran it to its last course here. So it's really, economy's not salvageable. So it'll be a controlled demolition. And the food is the big thing. Like China right now is sending to silage 6 weeks early their wheat crop.
Well, now, why would they do that? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've had a fair few videos to watch, a lot of translation in it. And it goes like this. They're using a different counting system. It's called a mu, M-U. And there's 6.2 mu in an acre. So we're going to use the unit of mu because that's what they use there for the actual land area versus the dollar amount out for wheat crop. And it's renminbi. So igamu, and you'll get about 1,000 to 1,200 renminbi. So 1,000 renminbi for that mu to come out for the wheat. Well, somebody is on the open market saying we'll give you 1,500 renminbi if you cut it now to give it to us for animal food. Silage. And I think in Chinese it's saile.
They're trying to keep their animals alive.
I'm not sure what's happening, but there's thousands of trucks lined up. So coming at from a farmer's perspective, they're going to make an extra 300 renminbi for that same acreage and they're going to cut it 6 weeks early. They're not going to compete with everybody when they go to sell. Then the price drops like everywhere because there's a glut of it. Everybody's trying to sell in, and they go, no, there's more coming. There's 10 tons there. Why do we need to give you a premium price? Everybody's got wheat. We'll give you 6 cents, take it or leave it. And that's kind of what happens at harvest season. But somebody's coming in, giving 1,500 renminbi per moo, and the farmers are jumping all over it. I mean, if I was a farmer, I would too. It's the most money they've ever made for their land, ever, hands down. You are got to be kidding me. Even with state set pricing, they still are making far more money. So video after video of combines going through and cutting silage, and then a whole wave of other farmers on megaphones, don't cut our food, don't cut our food. But what I don't understand is if it was really that organic, is it planned? Because you think the Chinese military would be up there stopping this right away, going, wait, you're cutting our food source down for silage before we get to harvest it, and we're already we're going into a war or some sort of food shortage. That's why they bought so many resources around the planet. And they're going to cut down part of their wheat crop to sell it for animal food. I don't know. Something really doesn't make sense there.
Well, if China goes into a war, you're going to have a period of months where they're not going to be able to import the
Fuel.
oil and gas, the fuel, right? Because China's limited. I mean, the Russians can send them things, but their pipeline going out to China doesn't have the capacity, and the Trans-Siberian Railroad doesn't have the capacity. China would have to just sort of muddle through without sufficient energy supplies. And that would mean, all their tractors, the combines, everything in their economy shut. So for them to go to war.
That's totally why. Because, in the Tarim Basin, they've been, pulling a lot of oil out. And also at the same time when I was following peak oil, this is back like 2005, 6-ish. I started to learn a lot about the basins that were in China. And what they were doing at that time was refilling the wells that were able to refill in their limestone caverns and whatnot. They were even using limestone caverns to refill oil reserves inside there as their strategic oil reserve, refilling some of the depleted wells. And they call it the teapots. And that's these small refineries or crackers where they'll start to crack the fuels. But they're little small refineries, nothing like on the Exxon Mobil. I mean, like hometown kind small. And that was the thing. There was, all these there was an article at that time called Revolt of the Teapots, where all the small refineries were like, no, we don't want to do it at this price because there's set prices. Look at global prices, double what you're giving us. So we're just not even going to refine. And then, they had to raise the prices inside China, which made everybody incredibly angry because, people who drove back then, cars were kind of a new thing, 2003, 2004 coming in China. It's not like, we just had cars. It was a big thing to get a car in 2004 in China. And have fuel prices raised and not available because, the teapots weren't cranking it out. That totally makes sense. If they're going to not have enough fuel, and they would rather get animal food out of that versus getting nothing and everything rotting in the fields.
Because they have to do
they have to do it right now.
They have to keep their animals alive. Yeah. Well, then here's another thought about this. If you are going to war and that food production is going to be interrupted, and food production is interrupted at the beginning of a war for China because you got India, and the Chinese Navy doesn't have the reach to battle the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. They have to first conquer certain areas, down there. They got to take Malaysia. They got to take Singapore. Then they can have basing to go on into the Indian Ocean. So it takes them a while to be able to clear the path to the Middle East.
I'm going to say, I'll stop you right there. Navy, yes, but using Jiakpu port over in Myanmar, and they already built massive rail lines and massive oil pipelines coming up through Myanmar. Because when I was working there, and this is why I started the Adapt 2030 channel, I was buying coffee, and we'd be running up in remote locations way past Pin Oluin.
Chinese operate
that far to go over to China from the back door there.
Can the Chinese, are they operating warships out of there now?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer for that, but I do know it's only a couple hundred miles once you unload off of Jiakpu to get into Yunnan province and then on to Kunming. So
Rangoon is
several oil unloading terminals there, and some of the biggest pipelines in Asia going from Jiakpu into China.
Well, Rangoon is a fabulous port, is it not? It's a really good.
We're talking about not Yangon port. You need to go out back into Malacca Straits, way up to near the border with Bangladesh, and you'll find a place called Jiakpu. It starts with a K. So remember, in Myanmar, it's a KY, it's a Jak.
Okay.
So KY, look for that port that starts with KY, way in the north up near Bangladesh. That's huge. They were doing massive dredging operations up there. I mean, massive. To
That
bring
were the
in giant
Chinese
super
doing this?
tankers of oil to unload
Yeah.
there. That's how deep of a water afforded it.
Oh, and they actually have rail lines that now run through Myanmar to China.
Oh, sets, not a rail line. We're talking, eight-lane highway of rails going through there.
This was the old during World War II. This
Yeah,
was
it was
known
the
as the
old,
Burma
yeah.
Road, right?
And
This
it was the
was
old Southern Silk Route too. So what's real
mhm.
interesting is, you look back in history and you see it's the Southern Silk Route that was used along with what you're talking about there for like the Flying Tigers when they were first getting in there, going up through Burma to set up, and also Yunnan province. It's really interesting flying the hump. And we get all these things in history that keep matching up for the same pass is used again and again and again. Khyber Pass. I mean, how long has the Khyber Pass been used through history? Thousands of years, and it's still very relevant today, even in our warfare or trade.
So if the Chinese could move their navy to those ports and operate out of those ports, they could then defeat the Indian Navy.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Now,
Yeah.
how could you disassemble a ship and then bring it by rail and reassemble it across the land bridge there?
Submarines, you could do that with smaller submarines. I know that the Russians have done that with submarines. Well,
At the
what
same
they'd
time.
want for warships is to be able to move the ordnance, the fuel for the warships, and the missiles and the ammunition for the ships, and torpedoes and stuff. Because warships only carry so many torpedoes and stuff. They go out, they have a fight, they got to come back, and they got to replenish those. And they don't have unlimited fuel. Much of the Chinese Navy are smaller warships, smaller surface ships, except for their submarines, and they can only go so far before they have to come back and refuel. So, and the Indian Ocean's pretty big, and if they have to cover all the way to the Arabian Sea to cover their transport, I mean, the implication is that India would be nuked too. India would be hit
Maldives.
or intimidated into neutrality, maybe.
Well, I know for sure China was setting up bases out in the Maldives because they were giving them billions and billions and billions of dollars in aid. This is the Maldives, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to get, and the story went, they were trying to get fishing rights, which they did. They got the exclusive fishing zone out there. So then Chinese trawlers went around and just scraped everything dry. And the local guys were like, whoa, just all the fish disappeared.
Now, there's an old British naval base that the
That's
Royal
right. They
Navy
got that.
used in Sri Lanka. It was where the British based their fleet out of. It used to be known by another name, but Sri Lanka was the basing
Ceylon
area. What's that?
or Ceylon or Ceylon.
Say Ceylon, yeah, Ceylon. Um, that was where the British Navy, I think it was it the aircraft carrier Hermes operated out of there, and the Japanese sunk it in the Indian Ocean. Um, there was I may be getting the name of the carrier wrong. The British were putting together a carrier group, and the same fleet that bombed Pearl Harbor Japanese sailed out into the Indian Ocean. That was their only incursion into it, and they sunk that British fleet. I've seen footage of they found where the ships are under the water. But is that would the Chinese have? I know the Chinese have been active in Sri Lanka. They could use that.
Well, they've been active all through the whole coastal regions heading over to the port of Yemen because that's that string of pearls that they have along through the Indian Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Gwadar is another one in Pakistan that they have access and control over. And you said going way out in the Indian Ocean, but if you could base yourself in the Maldives and that port is operational, then that would be a stopover point. And then if you do follow the string of pearls, it does go from Jakpu over to Sri Lanka, over to Gwadar in Pakistan, and then it ends up over in the Gulf of Aden there. Now, the Chinese don't control that port going into the Red Sea, but what they do control are ports further down in Kenya and Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that string of pearls is kind of originating from, which brought me to my research of, with this West African monsoon shifting, using the Sahel to grow more food, also tapping the Nubian sandstone aquifer from underground water resources combined with increasing rainfall from above. And then you're going to have a massive grow zone there, but then you'll need to export the food back to China, which makes sense on the string of pearls, because then you could guard it the entire way along by Navy.
Right. And you would have to either have the Indian Navy and Air Force neutralized, or you'd have to have them joining. What about the food situation? I mean, India has this tremendous population, 1.1 billion, maybe it's 1.2 billion now. How do they fare in all this?
Well, you saw that they've ceased exports of wheat now.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
locking it up too. This whole resource nationalism or food nationalism is going to be, I think, the thing that drives famine way faster than the actual crop losses. Is the full
Hmm.
disruption of anything exportable. So then I like to do the chasing the chain here, because you can already get a full list of the countries that are going to start to implode first. So just the lowest hanging fruit. What are the African nations that rely on the Ukraine and Russia for the majority of their wheat, corn, and soy and
You have
animal
all the
feed input?
countries from Morocco all the way to Afghanistan that are very dry. They don't have a lot of good land for growing. Their populations have grown massively over the last 30, 40 years, and they can't feed themselves. And yes, the Russians sank 7, 8 huge grain ships of the Ukrainians, and they've cut off all that grain. Ukrainians feed those countries, and now it's not happening.
Well, I saw some incredibly interesting images of Russian army loading Ukrainian farm combines and different farm machinery on the rails and on trucks and taking it out.
Taking
You
it
know,
out.
which brings me back to the Holodomor, that whole 1930s Bolshevik Revolution starvation thing. So that's what they did. They took away
Mhm.
the farm machinery and allowed them to starve, and then they cordoned off the area. I mean, anybody can read about this. 1930s Bolsheviks were super angry at the Ukrainians because they were growing wheat. There was a mechanization input and impetus, or instead, then they started to grow 6 times more grain than prior, just a few years, because they were using machinery. Well, you grow more grain, you can sell more grain. And they're becoming incredibly wealthy, even bourgeois with their little
Right.
mansions, and they
The
wouldn't.
kulaks.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Well, it
That
was
chapter of history is repeating, where they're taking the farm machinery back out again,
right.
which I find startling. Like, oh, thanks for the machinery. We'll take it back and grow grain in Russia.
Yeah, the thing about a regime like in China and Russia, the one thing they fear is a class of people who are independent, who have their own sources of money that aren't dependent on the government, that they could form their own independent centers. And this, by the way, was the basis of the Ukrainian Revolution. If you read this book here, this is a very interesting author. This book, this guy here,
Ukraine's maiden Russia's
Maidan,
war.
yeah, Russia's war. He is a Ukrainian professor, Mikhailo Vinitsky, and he explains what really was behind the 2014 revolution. And what it was is there was quietly growing in Ukraine a middle class of independent people. They weren't wealthy, they had their own businesses, and they wanted a better life for their kids. They weren't dependent, and they didn't like the corruption in the government. They wanted accountability from the government. And when in 2014 the riot police beat up their kids who had protested this, cutting them from the EU and forcing them into the Moscow's Eurasian Union, economic union, they got angry and they went out into the streets, and it began this process of reciprocal violence between the government and the people. And the way he describes what happened is he said that this middle class caused this, he called it a bourgeois revolution, because if you're dependent on the government, you can't make a revolution because you're getting your income from the government. And this is what happened in Russia. A few years ago, there was Yevgeny Primakov, who'd been the prime minister before Putin was, and said, look, we need to let the Russian middle class grow. And from 1998 to 2008, Russia had a tremendous new middle class. You had, 28, 29% of Russians suddenly were either working for independent businesses or they owned their own businesses. And these people weren't wealthy. These were small businesses. And yet these were the people and the children of these people that were doing the protests against Putin at the time when Putin went to get reelected president in 2012. And it was Putin, and I heard through Russian sources that Primakov was very unhappy with this. He said, we're going to smash these people. These people cannot be allowed to protest. They're too independent. We have to, push them down again, not allow them to have this. And of course, Ukraine became a problem for Moscow because they didn't want to become part of the system because their emerging middle class wanted to have their own life, not being under the thumb of Moscow and Moscow's mafia, larger mafia connection, the system of secret police and mafia and economy from the old Soviet state that was basically wrapped everything up in almost a feudal economic system. But yeah, the Holodomor, some people think 11 million Ukrainians were starved to death in that. And but looking at this larger food shortage in the country, let's talk about fertilizer for a second. Is it so much that China, Ukraine, Belarus are hoarding fertilizer, not because they're just trying to keep everybody else from having it, but they're hoarding the fertilizer because when things get desperate, they're going to need to use that fertilizer as much as possible on the land that they have to keep the food production going for their 150 million people, or you've got Central Asia, you've got tens of millions more, and China's massive food. I mean, they want to be able to keep growing, and if something breaks down, they want to be able to have this also as a weapon to withhold from other countries to say, you have to do what we say, using food as a weapon to control other people.
That's a teeter-totter, isn't it? The higher the fertilizer goes in one country, the lower it goes in another country. So if you're keeping it in to grow higher crops and bring more farmland online, you would need expanded fertilizer usage to bring more land online to produce, expand your production.
Right.
But at the same time, like we're going to see in the US, production's going down, especially in corn. So when you look at corn, see, that's kind of the perfect play to take out the knees of a country. Take the corn production out because your ethanol is gone too. And corn's the heaviest feeder for fertilizer. And we are going to the most massive corn shortage. And I keep saying recorded history, but I mean, when you're trying to compare it to something back during the Roman Empire, it's not really comparable. Okay, Phoenicians, yeah, try to compare corn production out of the Mayan kingdom compared to today. There's a lot of things but I'm trying to put the label on it. At the biggest ever losses in corn ever. It is going to rattle the markets. And the thing I keep hearing again from traders that I talk to, these guys are commodities traders that are on the either out of Chicago. And the thing is, they also anticipate a huge amount of people wanting physical delivery off their futures contracts because corn's going to get so lean across and unavailable across the planet. Exports are going to be restricted, resource nationalism, and what's going to be grown is going to be claimed on contract. So once they can't deliver anymore, the whole house of cards comes down.
Now, corn is used to feed animals, isn't it? A lot of
yeah, but there's a lot of other byproduct that could be used to feed cattle and dairy cattle and chicken and pig. But predominantly it is corn or the soy crush afterward. After they remove the oil, they take the residual and the cake, pressed cake, and they feed that through. But yeah, you're right. But then, the other thing is corn's also used in 6,000 products that are on supermarket shelves. You remove that out, the binders, the agents, the cornstarch, the high fructose corn syrup, the corn itself. If you're going to get cornmeal muffins, whatever, there's a lot of corn in a lot of things. Popcorn, bye-bye. Well, that's not really the same kind of corn, but that's not field corn. That's popcorn, a bit different.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But if you're just talking about true field corn, the dent corn is like, if you look at a corn, like the sweet corn, for example, it's all smooth and rounded on the edges, but dent corn actually has that dimple in it, and they call that field corn. So that was your corn 101 lesson there. So the popcorn is going to be different. Your regular sweet corn will be different. That's not really commercial. I mean, it is to a point regionally, but then dent corn or field corn is what you're going to take away. But that's in everything that is on a supermarket shelf in a box contains corn of some way, shape, or form or fashion. So then you're going to start to see things in boxes disappear off the shelves. Forget the cans. It's going to be in a box, usually a dry manufactured product or something with, like I said, corn starch in it. Now, there are some cans of different types of stews that also have the binder agents. The thickening agents are also from corn. So when you start to look at the gamut of almost everything in the supermarket that's in a box, I'm going to stick with boxes. Cans are a little in a box. Imagine if everything in a box on the shelf in the supermarkets actually disappears because we don't grow enough corn. Well, we won't be able to manufacture enough ethanol to keep anything to even blend with the fuels.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to take the knees out of a country, stop the fertilizer, they're going to stop the corn first and the sorghum because they feed too heavy. And then you can see what corn does. And our pipelines in America have magically been cut off. Wait a second. It seems like it's all coordinated globally. I just can't believe all this is happening just for those guys over there. It seems like it's a global unified effort to make it all happen and make it look like it's organic. And it seems like everybody's on the same page because they all have the same information on the intensity of the cycle. Our civilization can't be salvaged at this point. So it's going to be demolished.
So let me ask you, what is exactly do you think is going to happen in October of 2024? What do you see coming?
Well, there'll be a second electromagnetic field in our solar system with the combination of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune combining with their toroid field, looping into a wider, larger field.